I heard the house before I saw it. Some roofs whisper coal and soup. Some roofs brag brandy and song. This roof cracked like a knuckle. The cold settled hard over the hedges and made the gravel walk speak in tight syllables under every step. A bell on the gate rang once for show and once for warning. We were passing low, runners whispering on a ribbon of frost, when the night tugged at my sleeve with that specific insistence that means not a child's sadness. Not a lost letter, but a problem made by adults who have mistaken sharpness for strength. Gorston Hall sat like an accusation on the landscape. The windows were square mouths with tight lips. Inside, the old year had been coaxed to sit still with holly and polished silver. It tried. It failed. The house hummed with the kind of tension that makes chairs behave and people forget how. The patriarch had called his brood home for Christmas. That sounds like a hymn until you add pride to the melody. Then it becomes a march. I know that kind of summons. It is a net. He had thrown it wide. Sons from other counties, a daughter with politeness like a corset, wives working the arithmetic of insult and survival, even a stranger whose name fit too loosely on his face. And diamonds. The old man had a glittering habit, stones blue as old ice and red as stubborn fruit and white as a dare. He liked to handle them when other things slipped from grip. He liked to hold the hard things. I do not drop down chimneys where people are rehearsing selfishness as if it were a carol. Not at first. I listen. And that night the house breathed like a great animal with shallow lungs. The servants moved with the padded steps of witnesses. The family moved like chess pieces chosen by someone who confuses strategy with love. And in the east wing, behind a door that had learned to be obeyed, an old man paced a room that was a cage. Only the bars were made of money and malice and memory. Simeon Lee. His name had taught too many people to flinch. You know what happens when storms are invited to dinner. They do not leave politely. That evening, a guest arrived who seldom attends my list, but keeps a ledger of his own. A little Belgian with a great many cells in the part of the brain that is curious, and almost none in the part that tolerates untidiness of fact. Hercule Poirot. He had been persuaded by a friend and by rumor's hook to come take the air and perhaps the pudding. He took the air. The pudding would wait. I do not meddle with detectives. Their work is honest, and my bells are too loud for puzzles that need the hush between thoughts. But I can stand on a sill and keep drafts from taking sides. I can lean on a hinge so a corridor hears the right footstep and not the wrong. I can see who heats a room and who chills it. And that house needed witness. Dinner managed not to burn. Conversation did. A man like Simeon Lee can split a table the way ice splits a river, a sound first, then a slow tearing. He baited his sons. He needled their wives. He threatened with his will and smiggered with his eyes. He talked about diamonds because he knew they made everyone but one, quiet. He sent the one with a gentler soul to ring for more coffee and smirked at the cruelty of it. Christmas, he declared in the way tyrants declare mercy, a season for shaking the snow off the tree and counting what remains beneath it. The house felt the moment before it happened. Houses do. Boards braced, wax shivered on candle wicks. The corridor to the old man's room tightened like a muscle. He dismissed them all to their corners and went to his hoard. He locked the door. He locked his face. He laughed once, a noise like a metal file. Then he was silent, so long, the silence had to fight for its own life. Then the scream came. I have heard many sounds that people afterwards call a scream. Some are pleas, some are performances, many are warnings. This was a tearing. It ripped through the house and took air with it. Chairs pushed back. Hands found banisters. At the far end of the hall, the door to Simeon Lee's room announced its innocence in the manner of doors. It stood locked, the key inside with its master, and no other way in but windows that sulked behind unmarked snow. They broke through. Chaos with etiquette, because terror learns manners in big houses. The room had arranged itself like a lesson. Furniture on its feet, fire thinking about dying. A table that had hosted diamonds and now hosted nothing. The old man on the floor, throat opened, blood convinced by gravity, a wash of it where rage had wanted theater. A safe, open, but empty, or as empty as a safe can look when it knows it has a part to play. A window closed and honest, with frost sealing its lips, and no one inside but the dead and the implications. I do not rejoice at such scenes. I take inventory. I noted what was too tidy and what was properly untidy. A chair leg with a smear not its own. A scrap of rubber that had no business in an old man's complicated life. A faint scent of carbolic where no nurse had been invited. These are not gifts. These are the little sins objects commit when they try to pretend they have nothing to confess. Poirot took inventory too, but with a precision that does not need slays. He spoke softly to the room as if it were a suspect with a conscience. He touched nothing and saw everything. He allowed the police their proud circles and the family their staggered alibis. He took note of the diamonds that had not been recovered and the money that remained untouched, because hate often spends differently than thieves do. He watched the sons. He watched the wives. He watched the stranger who wore a face like an echo. He watched the daughter who had built a quiet life on the ruins of a loud one. He watched the servant who listened in the way people listen when they have learned that listening is the safest way to avoid being noticed. I went back to my rounds. I do not abandon Christmas for murder, though they often try to share the night. I tucked a wooden engine into a stocking, a county over, set a loaf crust a shade darker for a baker who trusts his nose more than clocks, turned a page in a child's picture book so he would discover his favorite animal first in the morning. And when the sleigh's path curved back over Gorston Hall, I could feel the house had moved from shock to maneuver. Locked room puzzles are the sort grown people invent to keep themselves from admitting the door is only one way in. There are other ways. There are always other ways. The room had a door of habit, servant's passage, narrow and mean, used long ago for carrying disgrace around a house without scuffing the front hall. It had a door of family, the past, that indefatigable porter who can smuggle any shape through any hour. And there was the oldest door of all, a plan made so long ago it had learned to call itself instinct. Poirot drank his chocolate and listened. He asked the simple questions that offend clever men because they are so plain. Who knew about the diamonds? Who hated enough to make a scream sound staged? Who wanted not money, but revenge that felt like accountancy? Whose hands were soft with fear, and whose hands were clean with preparation? The answers came in little packets of truth and performance. He unwrapped both with the same calm. Two stones sat at the center of the puzzle. One was blue-white and bored through the middle, hiding in a toy a child might keep, because a man who has built his life on putting weight where no one expects will continue the habit with gems. The other was a woman's memory shaped like a sun. Simeon Lee had scattered his likeness in more places than his will admitted. Blood recognizes blood, and malice recognizes opportunity. A stranger with a familiar face had arrived under a name that was true, enough to be unhelpful. He did not bring murder to the house. He brought a mirror. The scream. Remember the scream. It had been loud enough to wake pride, but precise enough to carry a message. People believed it because it sounded like a thing Simeon Lee might finally be forced to make. A sound that admitted weakness. But there had been a test in it too, one that Poirot heard and I admired. The scream had no weight on the walls. It had been made by a mouth, not by a body in the act of dying. The blood had made a drama the throat had not ordered. The safe had made a declaration the thief had not required. What kind of killer scripts a death to punish an audience? One of his sons, one with law in his mouth and hunger in his eyes, wanted money the clean way, but looked at it the other way too long. Another son carried a grievance like a birthmark. A third had learned to make charm do the labor of character. The daughter carried the heaviness of being her mother's child and her father's afterthought. The wives had more clarity than any of the men and had learned the economy of silence to keep a roof in place. The stranger, with his dark eyes and quiet anger, was not a thief. He was a reckoning, and reckoning wears patience. Poirot moved through their statements the way a hand tests fabric for its true grain. He found the selvage, a small object missing from a washstand, a bit of rubber like a ball that could take in diamonds and then lie about it. A pool of blood whose edges were too smooth, because blood that flows for hate behaves differently from blood that flows for haste. He measured the time it takes to run down a passage and back, if your courage is not your friend. He weighed the talents needed to cut a throat cleanly against the talents needed to act a scream that made a house come running at once. He asked for the women's stories without dressing them in the men's adjectives. He looked each son in the face and let them see what he saw, so they could decide whether to continue pretending. And when the stranger finally met him eye to eye, the detective did not accuse. He offered something harder, the shape of the truth, which requires a man to choose what to do with it. By the time the eastern windows admitted the color that pretends to be dawn before dawn has consented, the house held two answers and needed to keep only one. The first answer, the convenient one, would have put the diamonds on a common thief and the knife in the hand of a son everyone already knew how to disapprove. The second answer, the correct one, drew a line backward from a gaping throat to a long-ago sin, a child disowned, a woman dishonored, a life shaped around absence. Hate, when it finally takes human form, likes a ceremony. That was the locked room's secret. The room had been locked by vanity, not by key. Poirot named the right name. He did it without relish. He does not enjoy shame. He unmasks it. The man who had wanted to be only a mirror for his father's face had become a blade for his father's neck, and in the planning of it, he had borrowed too many tricks from the old man's book. Diamonds meant to confuse, a scream meant to stage-manage witnesses, a locked door meant to write an alibi in wood. It almost worked, because the house, out of habit, agreed to be deceived by things that looked like wealth and will. The law, necessary winter that it is, thawed a little under the heat of Poirot's discretion. There are facts to be given to large rooms so that order can be maintained. There are truths to be given to smaller rooms so that souls can be mended or broken properly. He managed both. The police left with a culprit pulled clean from the web. The family remained with a different assignment, to consider the kind of man who had made them all to his liking and ask, on Christmas of all days, if they wanted to continue that legacy. I do not sign off on punishments. My jurisdiction is narrower and perhaps more stubborn. Mornings. I set a few things right that a long night had kinked. I nudged a bittered maid to discover the envelope in which her small back wages, held back by the old man for sport, had been tucked and forgotten. I tipped the blue-white stone from its rubber hiding place into a tray where a gouty colonel's model trains would find it later, because a child's eye would bring in the adults with laughter instead of suspicion. I reminded a locked drawer to give up a scarf that had belonged to a woman no one had allowed to be properly mourned. I shifted holly on a mantle so the prickle faced the wood, and not the hands that would rest there, fresh from grief. The sons did what sons often do. When the son reaches a deadly room for the first time, they return to their languages. One talked of estates, one talked of headlines, one talked of luggage. The daughter talked to the servants as if they were people, because she always had. The wives planned breakfast so that tea would reach mouths that needed it before anyone said something they could not recall later without shame. Poirot, who believes in order the way some men believe in angels, allowed himself a small luxury. He looked out a window toward my path and raised one eyebrow, as if to ask whether I approved of mercy measured and justice applied without swagger. I am not a judge. I am a messenger. I bowed the smallest bow a man in a sleigh can manage, without making reindeer think he's dropping the reins. By afternoon, the house had achieved the most it could, an honest quiet. Pudding steamed without pretense. For once, no one pretended to like the parts they did not like. Crackers popped and gave up their tin crowns, and even the eldest head allowed itself one, because crowns that arrive with jokes are safer than crowns that arrive with orders. A small train circled without derailing. A diamond sat where it belonged, no longer a dare, only a glittering stone on a dish, until its rightful keeper came to claim it, with a signature instead of a scream. I passed again after dark. The gate bell rang, once for blessing and not at all for warning. The gravel still spoke, but softer. The roof had stopped cracking its knuckles. Gorston Hall had, for the moment, chosen to be a house and not a stage. Here is what the night taught, trimmed of holly and left plain. A locked room is usually a heart. The key is usually a history. And the scream that seems to explain everything often exists only to distract you from the quiet clue sitting patient in the corner. Diamonds are hard. So is forgiveness. One you hide in rubber because you don't trust anyone. The other you hide in pride because you don't trust yourself. Both ruin a Christmas if you let them. If you find yourself this season in a house where chairs behave and people forget how, do not become the old man at your own table. Let someone else handle the purse while you open a drawer with better contents. Ask the obvious questions. Accept the plain answers. Apologize before the brandy. If there is a scream, test the walls for whether it's stuck. If there is a locked door, ask who locked it and why that was easier than telling the truth out loud. And if a little Belgian with famous cells appears and asks for cocoa, give him the good kind and the better chair. He will do his work. You do yours. I turned the sleigh toward the line of wind that knows the way home. The bells took their clean rhythm. The stars approved by refusing to blink. London's lamps stitched a hem along the horizon. Behind us lay a great house, slightly less great for having met the cost of its grandeur, and a family slightly more a family for having been forced to look at the bill. Merry Christmas. Keep your rooms open, your voices modest, your jewels in their right boxes, and your mercies measured but real. And when you hear a scream on a winter night, remember to check for the little scrap of evidence everyone polite has decided not to notice. Often, it's rubber. Sometimes it's regret. Either way, it will tell you the truth if you hold it gently and listen.